He could have become the weapon that would change the course of the war, but he appeared when there were no ships, no time, and no hope left. An aircraft that not even its own fleet knew about. A machine too perfect to survive. Its pilots took off knowing they wouldn't return, and their enemies studied them with undisguised admiration. Why did the Meteor, Japan's best carrier-borne bomber, never manage to take off on time? Why did the Empire create a masterpiece at the very moment everything was already ablaze? The answers lie in this story, and the closer to the end, the more terrifying the truth. December 1941. The Pacific Ocean ignites. From the sky, lightning seems to rain down as Japanese carrier-based aircraft, sleek, flawless, and fast, strike. For the first time, the world sees a power no one expected from the island empire. Pearl Harbor becomes a symbol not only of destruction, but of the triumph of Japanese engineering. Those who watch from the ground see not just an attack. It's a demonstration of a new era of warfare, where the fate of fleets is decided not by artillery, but by the wings above. The Japanese Zeros become a legend. They are swift, maneuverable, and lethally accurate. Imperial pilots feel like celestial samurai, and the whole world seems to have paused before their might. But 3 years later, everything would turn upside down. By then, the sky already belonged to the Americans. Where light, elegant Japanese fighters once dominated, now massive, armored Allied machines rule. The Zeros lose their advantage, and what seemed invulnerable yesterday becomes prey today. The clash of old and new is like a struggle of eras. Japanese technology, once admired for its balance and grace, proves too fragile in a world where power, armor, and technology win. The Empire, accustomed to lightning strikes, is now forced to defend. And yet, the Japanese are not ready to surrender. Somewhere deep within the military bureaus, amidst the smell of metal and hot oil, engineers sit down at the blueprints again. They need to create not just a plane, but a symbol of rebirth, a machine that will return the sky to the flag of the rising sun. They understand that there is only one way to win: by cheating the very nature of time, to do something that the opponents have not yet realized. They are seeking a new model of war, heavy, fast, flexible. In their imagination, a silhouette capable of changing the outcome of battles is born. In early 1941, when Japanese aviation was still bathed in the glory of victories, something that could become its future was already germinating within the engineering walls of the Aichi company. Amidst the blueprints, calculations, and the smell of kerosene, an idea, which at first seemed insane, was circulating. To create a plane capable of performing all the fleet's tasks at once. Not just dive bombing, not just carrying a torpedo, but becoming a unified weapon of the sky, fast, heavy, and long range. Thus was born the project that would soon be named Ryusei, the shooting star. But to those who created it, it would become the Meteor, a symbol of light cutting through the darkness of defeats. Nakamura Azaki was appointed the chief engineer, a man whose hands remembered the feel of metal and whose mind held ideas for a plane that could change everything. He saw how the Zeros won in the first months of the war, and how quickly those victories turned into an illusion. America learned swiftly. Its planes became faster, their armor stronger, their pilots cooler. Azaki understood that the era of light machines was ending. To regain superiority, Japan needed a different kind of weapon. Not just sharp, but versatile. On the vellum sheets, he drew a silhouette unlike any previous Japanese aircraft. A wide fuselage, powerful wing consoles, space for the crew and armament. The Meteor had to carry a heavy torpedo under its belly, dive precisely like a bomber, and yet fly at a speed that only fighters were previously capable of. He dreamed of combining three essences in one airframe: scout, attacker, and hunter. The military was skeptical of his enthusiasm. They already saw the front rapidly fading and resources draining. The Imperial fleet was losing ships, fuel, and experienced pilots. But even in despair, the Japanese knew how to believe. And when Aichi showed the blueprint with the elegant mid-wing monoplane and the wing-folding mechanism, the Navy General Staff approved the project. The machine received the number B7A and the official designation as the new generation universal carrier-based attack aircraft. Long nights began in the design bureau. People worked under dim lamps against a backdrop of alarming reports from the front. Every bolt, every panel was created not only from metal, but from the belief that the Empire was still capable of a miracle. Aichi understood that this plane was not just a project, but a challenge to time. While others desperately patched up old models, he was creating a future where speed, firepower, and flexibility in combat determined everything. His engineers called the Ryusei the Steel Dragon, a machine that, like a legendary creature, was supposed to ascend above the sea and strike from the heavens with one flap of its wings, turning the tide of battle. But time was passing. America was already building new aircraft carriers. The Allies were closing in on the islands, and in Japan, amidst the ruins of factories and the shortage of aluminum, hope was growing, encapsulated in a single aircraft. It was meant to be the thing that would change the outcome of the war, if only it could take off in time. When the blueprints turned into the first aluminum frames, it became clear that the Meteor would not be an ordinary aircraft. It was born not of dogma, but of desperate audacity. In a world where every rivet cost as much as a bullet, Aichi engineers went against all the rules. They understood that if they followed conventional designs, Japan simply wouldn't make it in time. Therefore, Aichi decided on something none of his colleagues had done. Instead of the usual low wing, he chose a mid-wing configuration, a rare decision for carrier-based machines. It allowed for better stability during diving and the placement of a powerful engine at the center of gravity, maintaining balance even during sharp maneuvers. No Japanese aircraft before this had such proportions: a long fuselage, folding wings, and an internal torpedo bay. All this required new calculations, new mechanisms, and new assembly technologies. Hundreds of times engineers argued, redrew mock-ups, and tested on stands. Every day brought new problems: a shortage of materials, a lack of skilled workers, and nearby bombings. But the people in the bureau didn't give up. They called themselves the artisans of the last miracle. The engine became a separate headache. The Nakajima Homar 18-cylinder radial engine, which promised incredible power, proved to be temperamental like a living creature. It overheated, produced vibrations, and required rare alloys. But the Meteor could not be born without it. Engineers returned to the blueprints again and again, resoldering fuel lines and readjusting the cooling system. Every successful test was perceived as a small victory, every breakdown as a personal defeat. Meanwhile, the front was nearing the brink. America was seizing islands, the fleet was losing ships and fuel depots. Production capacity was dwindling, aluminum was being replaced with steel, and pilots were leaving for the front without waiting for their planes. And yet, the Aichi Design Bureau continued to work. People slept right next to the machine tools, writing reports to the sound of sirens. No one spoke of defeat, only of deadlines. Aichi felt time turning into an enemy with each passing day. The war, which had once stimulated invention, was now devouring its own creators. His Meteor already existed in blueprints, in parts, in the imagination. But the sky demanded not an idea, but a machine ready to fly. And if it didn't appear now, others would occupy the sky. Every delay in the prototype's flight felt like a blow to the nation's pride. But Aichi persisted because he believed. Even if this plane was born in the final days of the Empire, it would still become its symbol. Not a weapon for victory, but proof that Japanese engineering could challenge time. And this challenge was already sounding in the roar of the engines of the first completed Meteor, which was about to lift off the runway. When the first Meteor was finally rolled out of the hangar, even hardened military personnel fell silent for a moment. Before them stood a machine in which power and grace seemed to have united. Its lines were swift, the wings seemingly carved from the wind, and the fuselage breathed power. This plane was unlike any other Japanese aircraft. It looked not like a continuation of tradition, but like a step into a future that the Empire might not live to see. Inside, the Nakajima Homar 18-cylinder engine roared, created with the same fanaticism with which ancient masters forged swords. Its power reached 1,800 horsepower, a colossal value for a carrier-based aircraft. In tests, the Meteor accelerated up to almost 600 km/h, and yet maintained a maneuverability unreachable for heavy machines. It climbed above the clouds, evaded attacks, and dived with the precision of a bird of prey. Its range exceeded 3,000 km. This meant it could strike targets far behind the front line, returning when the enemy already considered itself safe. The design allowed it to carry either a heavy torpedo or up to a ton of bombs, and the armament included synchronous 20mm cannons and a defensive machine gun. It could operate as a torpedo bomber, a dive bomber, and a scout. It was not a plane. It was a flying arsenal, the embodiment of the dream of a universal fighter. Engineers admired it as if it were a work of art. Every rivet, every rounded panel reflected the persistence of those who didn't give up, even when the world around them was crumbling. The Meteor became a symbol that Japan could still create perfection. It didn't just fly. It embodied the pride of a nation that refused to believe in defeat. But in this beauty, there was a bitter irony. The one who was supposed to take off from the decks of aircraft carriers no longer had anywhere to take off from. Naval air groups were losing their bases one after another. Factories were evacuated, ships were sinking, and fuel was rationed among desperate missions where there was no place for new experiments. While the Meteor was being prepared for serial production, the sky over the Pacific was already filled with American Hellcats and Corsairs. They were simpler, rougher, but more numerous. Against them, even the most perfect aircraft had no chance if it wasn't backed by a powerful industry. Ozaki and his team knew this. They understood they were creating a warrior who might never get to fight. Yet they continued because the Meteor was not a weapon to them, but an idea. Proof that the spirit of engineering does not die with the Empire. It was a mechanical samurai, born too late to save its country, but perfect enough to remain in memory as its last legend. By 1943, Japan no longer resembled the confident power that had once set the sky ablaze over Pearl Harbor. The country was hemorrhaging resources, industry was suffocating under the weight of bombings, and the fleet was losing one vessel after another. Every new day brought news of sunken convoys, scorched airfields, and burned depots. The Empire, accustomed to advancing, was now living on the edge of survival. And it was at this moment that the Meteor was ready for takeoff. Tests showed it was capable of more than expected. But when the engineers handed over the first production models to the military, it turned out that there was simply nowhere for them to fly. The decks for which the plane was created were disappearing one after another into the sea abyss. The aircraft carrier Taiho, the pride of the fleet, did not manage to take the new squadron aboard. An explosion below deck tore it apart in minutes. Shinano, a giant among ships, was launched as a symbol of rebirth, but was hit by torpedoes and sank, without ever becoming a home for its meteors. Thus began the strange era when the newest aircraft were born into a world where the sky for which they were created no longer existed. The machines stood on airfields, ready for takeoff, but without orders. Their pilots trained on short runways, where instead of sea breeze, the air smelled of ash and burnt kerosene. Where the anthem of victories once sounded, now air raid sirens blared. Everything the Empire had built for decades crumbled to dust. The Aichi factories were evacuated, but this only delayed the inevitable. Aluminum supplies ran out. Parts had to be made from steel, heavy and impractical. Each new batch of Meteors left the workshops in smaller numbers, and each plane cost more than could be afforded. The Pacific War turned into a clash not of ideas, but of production. America churned out planes by the hundreds, filling the entire horizon with them, while Japan released dozens, hoping that at least one of them would change the outcome. The Meteor was perfect, but its time was over. It appeared when the very concept of air superiority for Japan had become a memory. And yet, the pilots looked at it with the same reverence with which ancient samurai looked at their sword. Even if the battlefield is scorched, honor demands taking to the air. They knew that there might be nowhere to return to, but they still prepared the machines for flight. Thus, the Meteor became a symbol not of the offensive, but of the last breath. Not a weapon of victory, but an image of resilience on the brink of the abyss. While black columns of smoke rose above the sea, the rare flashes of its silvery wings still gleamed in the sky. They took off into a world where the sky had long turned to ashes, but even there, they continued to shine like meteors, flying through the night, too late to save the dawn, but brightly enough to remind of it. When the last surviving meteors left the factory hangars, traces of rushed assembly were still visible on their bodies, fingerprints of engineers who worked through the nights under the sound of sirens. These planes were no longer intended for aircraft carriers. There was simply no place to base them. Now they stood on the coastal airfields of Honshu and Kyushu, where instead of the sea breeze, the smell of smoke blew into the pilots' faces, and the sounds of approaching enemy squadrons could be heard in the distance. Every flight was like a farewell. The pilots knew there would be no way back. They took off from overloaded runways, sometimes under fire, with fuel calculated only for one strike. Their missions were no longer called combat operations. They were acts of faith, attempts to prove that the spirit of the Empire was still alive. In the cockpits, there was silence, broken only by the steady hum of the Homar engine, which sounded like a heart beating against fate. Lieutenant Nakajima went into battle first, a young pilot who had managed to fly only a few dozen hours in the new machine. His Meteor lifted off the runway as if breaking free from the Earth's captivity. He guided the plane toward the American landing formation off the coast of Okinawa. Radar spotted him long before the target, but he still went straight, descending into the clouds until he saw the gray hulls of the ships. The last thing observers on the shore managed to notice was a flash on the horizon. No one knew if he reached the target, but Nakajima was whispered about in the barracks for a long time as a symbol that one could take off even when the fall was inevitable. One after another, the meteors disappeared into the sky. Their attacks seemed insane. Single sorties against dozens of Hellcats and Corsairs, heavy, fast, with a numerical advantage that was impossible to fight against. Americans wrote in reports that the Japanese pilots attacked with incredible tenacity, as if ignoring the fire. They went into a dive from the altitude of the clouds and released torpedoes when their planes were already engulfed in anti-aircraft tracers. On the ground, only tire tracks, tools by open crates, and unsigned letters on the tables remained. The engineers who assembled these machines listened to the distant roar and understood. Every flight was not just a battle, but the last word of a country that refused to acknowledge the end. On one spring evening in 1945, several meteors took off from an airfield in Kyushu. The sun set especially slowly that day, as if it itself did not want to disappear. The pilots did not return. The next day, an American squadron entered the area where they were supposed to be. Later, sailors recalled seeing flashes in the sky, resembling the fiery trails of falling stars. Thus, the meteor justified its name. It flew brightly, briefly, dazzlingly. A machine born of calculation and cold metal ended its journey in acts of human devotion and pride. It did not change the outcome of the war, but became its poetic metaphor, a moment of beauty amidst the chaos, a flight without return, where every pilot knew that even if the sky burned, it would remember their trail. When silence fell on the airfields where engines had recently roared, a new era hung over Japan. An era in which the sky no longer belonged to it. The empire capitulated, and all that remained of its military might were charred factory ruins, empty hangars, and a few surviving machines. Among them was the Meteor. It was not destroyed. It seemed too unusual even to the enemies. American troops occupying Japanese airfields found several Meteors almost intact. One of them was sent to the States to a base for testing. There, it was first seen by engineers accustomed to considering Japanese aviation as backward and easy prey. But this plane shattered all stereotypes. Its forms were precise to the millimeter. The aerodynamics were elegant, the layout exceptional. The grace, as the Americans nicknamed it, immediately attracted the interest of specialists. Test flights were conducted carefully. Pilots noted the controls were soft, responsive, and the plane was stable even at high speeds. The wing aerodynamics impressed with its balance. It could dive, maneuver, and maintain control where most heavy machines lost stability. The wing folding mechanism and the internal torpedo mounting evoked admiration for their ingenuity. One American report began with the words, "If this plane had appeared 2 years earlier, it would have been a serious problem." Engineers meticulously studied the design, the metal, the mounting, the cooling system, and the placement of the armament. They noted that the Japanese had managed to combine power and maneuverability, which even some American models had not achieved. It was not just a weapon, but an engineering masterpiece born in desperation and brought to perfection. Thus, the irony of history manifested itself fully. Those who had recently shot down meteors over the sea now viewed them with admiration and respect. Defeat turned into recognition. The enemy became a student. But for the Japanese, this recognition was bitter. Their engineers, left without work and a future, knew their creation had finally been appreciated. But too late. The machine created to defend the homeland became an exhibit in a foreign museum. It was disassembled, measured, documented, and sent to the National Air and Space Museum, where it took its place among the victors, not as a trophy, but as a testament to the talent of its creators. Visitors passed by, unaware of how many sleepless nights, broken hands, and how much pride were invested in this steel body. And those who understood saw in the Meteor not just a plane, but the last page in the history of Japanese wartime engineering. America learned from the enemy's mistakes, and Japan from its faith in a miracle. Thus, defeat became a source of inspiration for those preparing for a new era, the era of jet machines. And the Meteor remained between them, a quiet reminder that even in losing, one can create something that will make the victor bow their head. In the museum hall, where the air is imbued with silence and the smell of old metal, under the soft light of lamps stands a plane that never managed to change history. Its smooth body gleams as if time has passed it by. This is the very Meteor, lonely, the last one. It no longer roars with its engine, does not take off from a deck, and does not go into a dive. Now it is a witness, not a participant. A silent guardian of a dream that turned out to be faster than its creators, but slower than the war itself. People pass by without lingering. To them, it is just one of the exhibits of the Second World War. But if you stop, approach closer, you can feel the breath of an era in it. Not only the work of engineers is imprinted on its skin, the fate of an entire country is enclosed within it. Japan invested everything it had left into this plane: genius, fanaticism, pride, and despair. It became a mirror of the empire, strong, brave, talented, but coming to its sunset too late. Its lines tell the story of a people who believed they could defeat the world by relying on spirit and skill. Its short life in the sky is a metaphor for Japan of those years. A swift ascent, a blinding light, and a fall into ash. But even having fallen, it left a trail visible from afar. Sometimes children stop by this plane. They look at it with delight, not realizing that before them is not just technology, but a symbol of persistence. And perhaps it is in these moments that the Meteor is still alive. Not as a weapon, but as a reminder of human obsession with perfection. Historians debate what would have happened if it had appeared earlier, in 42, not 44. Perhaps the battles off the coasts of Okinawa and the Philippines would have gone differently. Perhaps the empire would have lasted longer. But history does not like speculation. There is no place in it for those who were late, even if they were geniuses. And yet, there is something more in this defeat. The Meteor became the last light of a fading era, short, bright, like a supernova flash. It did not save the country, but became its reflection in the most difficult hour. A machine in which metal met a dream, and defeat turned out to be not the end, but a majestic shadow of glory. When you look at it today, it's easy to forget that this plane was created in the hell of war. It seems peaceful, as if it got tired of fighting and chose peace. But if you listen closely, the roar of a distant engine can still be heard in its silence. An echo of a time when Japan tried to catch up with its own Meteor.